My family actually invited my ex-boyfriend to dinner and told me it was just to keep things friendly. I couldn't believe my ears. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I'm Laura Quinn, 26, and I had just ended a painful 3-year relationship with Jace Monroe. The breakup was hard, and I needed space to heal. I never expected my family to invite him over like nothing happened. My parents, Holly and Dean Quinn, thought it would be friendly and harmless. But to me, it felt like a betrayal. When I arrived at the dinner, my stomach churned. Jace was already there, smiling politely, acting like everything was normal. My parents greeted him warmly, completely unaware of the tension in the room. I tried to stay calm, but every glance from him reminded me of everything I had gone through. The lies, the heartbreak, and the nights I cried alone. As dinner started, Jace began dropping little comments that stung more than they should. He mentioned memories only the two of us shared, and his tone had this smug confidence that made my blood boil. I could see my parents laughing awkwardly, unsure if they should intervene, and that made it worse. I realized they had no idea what he had done. I quietly observed him, noticing the arrogance I had once ignored. Every smile, every word, seemed carefully designed to unsettle me. I wanted to shout, to confront him, but I held back. I decided I wouldn't let him ruin the evening. Instead, I would reclaim control quietly, without losing my dignity. Later, while getting dessert, I overheard something that confirmed my worst fears. Jace had called my parents earlier, telling half-truths about his life, and subtly making me look unreasonable. My family had been unknowingly manipulated, and the sense of betrayal cut deep. But instead of lashing out, I chose a different approach. I started talking about my own life, my recent promotion, the new skills I had learned, and my travels. I let my parents see how much I had grown and how independent I had become. Slowly, the attention shifted from him to me, and I could see his confident facade starting to crack. By the end of dinner, the room had completely changed. Jace was stumbling over his words, trying to save face, while my parents began to understand how he had misrepresented himself. I left the table with my head held high, knowing I had regained my power without humiliation or drama. That night, I reflected on everything, the betrayal, the awkwardness, and the unexpected lesson. I realized revenge wasn't about hurting him, but about standing up for myself and showing my worth. For the first time in a long time, I felt free, strong, and ready for the next chapter of my life. Laura stepped into the dining room, and a heavy silence hit her like a wall. The air felt tight, almost suffocating, and she realized instantly that something was off. Her parents, Holly and Dean, were chatting casually with Jace, laughing at his jokes as if he were just another guest. Their cheerfulness made Lara's stomach twist. She could feel every polite smile from her father and every nod from her mother pressing down on her chest. Jace sat across from her, his posture relaxed, his charm on full display. He greeted her with that same easy smile that had once made her heart race, now sending a shiver down her spine. He spoke in light, casual tones, asking about her day and commenting on small things around the room, all while ignoring the months of hurt and heartbreak they had shared. Lara's hands tightened around her napkin, and she forced herself to breathe slowly, trying to calm the storm rising inside her. Every laugh he drew from her parents felt like a silent jab. She wondered if this was a cruel coincidence, or if her family had unknowingly set her up for humiliation. Each word he said seemed calculated to remind her of everything she had endured with him. The broken promises, the nights of disappointment, the way he had once made her feel small. He hadn't changed, and the old wounds throbbed as if they had been freshly opened. Lara caught herself scanning the room, looking for a way out, but there was none. The table was set perfectly, the food smelled comforting, and yet the tension made it impossible to relax. She could feel the invisible weight of every glance Jace threw her way, casual but pointed, like he was testing her patience. Her parents were oblivious, but Lara couldn't ignore the sting of betrayal curling in her chest. She reminded herself to stay composed, even as the initial shock made her cheeks burn. It was a strange mix of anger and disbelief, the feeling that the people who were supposed to protect her from pain had inadvertently handed it to her. The betrayal wasn't just from Jace anymore. It was tied up with her parents' naivety, their failure to see how inappropriate this dinner was. Lara took a slow sip of water, trying to anchor herself, to breathe through the tightness in her chest. She didn't know if this was intentional or a mistake, but either way, the effect was the same. Her mind raced with questions about why they hadn't considered her feelings, and a cold resolve began to build inside her. She wouldn't crumble tonight. Not here. Not in front of him. She would endure the evening, and quietly, she would figure out how to reclaim her dignity from this awkward, tense, and painful moment. The dinner had begun, but Lara already knew one thing. Tonight would not end the way Jace expected. Lara stared at her plate, but her mind had already drifted years back. She remembered the countless nights she had poured her heart out to Jace, trying to explain how hurt she felt when he ignored her feeling. Each time she tried to talk, he brushed her off with a casual shrug or a dismissive joke, making her doubt herself. Those moments had piled up quietly, one after another, until they became impossible to ignore. She could still hear the faint ring of his phone late at night, the way he would step out of the room and speak in hushed tone. At the time, she trusted him completely, never imagining those secretive conversations hid lies and half-truths. Later, discovering the truth shattered something inside her. Every lie felt like a knife twisting deeper, every broken promise another layer of weight on her chest. Lara remembered the final months of their relationship, when even small disagreements became mountains. She had tried so hard to make things work, bending over backward to meet him halfway, only to be met with excuses and avoidance. His charm had masked the way he manipulated her emotions, and she now realized how much she had sacrificed for someone who never truly appreciated. The heartbreak lingered like a shadow, following her into this very room. Seeing him across the table, smiling as if nothing had happened, reopened old wounds she had barely healed from. She felt the familiar sting of betrayal, not just from him, but from the sense that everyone around her seemed blind to the manipulation she had endured. Anger bubbled quietly under her skin, sharp and controlled. Lara knew she had a choice: to crumble under the weight of old pain or to rise above it. These memories, painful as they were, had given her a strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She could use this clarity tonight, to assert herself without anger boiling over, to ensure that she would not be diminished in her own family's home. She replayed the worst moments silently, the dismissals, the whispered lies, the nights of loneliness, letting the fire of remembrance fuel her resolve. This wasn't about revenge yet. It was about reclaiming the control Jace had once stolen from her, showing that she was no longer the girl who could be swayed or shaken by his presence. For the first time that evening, Lara felt a strange mix of sorrow and empowerment. The hurt was still there, but so was a fierce determination. She would not let the ghosts of the past dictate how she faced this dinner. Every memory reminded her of why she deserved better, why she would stand firm and dignified no matter how much he tried to unsettle her. Lara straightened in her chair, letting the painful recollections harden into quiet strength. She knew the night was far from over, but with each thought of past hurt, she prepared herself to meet it with a calm she hadn't felt in years. The past might have shaped her, but tonight, she would define the present. The food had barely been served when Jace leaned back in his chair, his grin casual, almost too smooth. He brought up the little things only Lara and he had experienced. The inside jokes, the trips they'd taken, even the way they had argued over trivial things. His tone was light, almost playful, but Lara felt the sting immediately. Each word reminded her of moments she had tried to forget, moments he now twisted into subtle reminders of her vulnerability. He turned to her parents, his voice warm and sincere. "I have to say, you guys handled everything perfectly. The way things ended was really graceful." Lara's chest tightened. The compliment was directed at her parents, but it was also a sharp edge aimed at her. She could see the nervous twitch in her mother's smile and the awkward glance Dean shot across the table. Neither of them seemed to realize how loaded his words were. Jace continued effortlessly, sprinkling small remarks throughout the conversation. A comment about a movie they'd loved together, a story from a weekend they had spent with mutual friends. Nothing overt, nothing aggressive. Yet every sentence carried a subtle jab, a gentle prod that unsettled Lara more than a direct insult ever could. Her appetite vanished, replaced by a rising tension that she fought to hide. Lara noticed the delicate shift in her parents' demeanor. Holly chuckled nervously, trying to steer the conversation away from certain topics, while Dean cleared his throat, giving brief, distracted answers. The unease in their reactions made it clear to Lara that they sensed something was off, but they didn't know how to stop it without making the situation worse. Jace seemed almost smug, aware of the effect he was having. He didn't push too hard, but the pattern was unmistakable. Small, carefully chosen remarks meant to remind Lara of the past while leaving her parents convinced that he was simply being friendly. Each reference to shared memories or subtle praise for how she had handled certain situations felt like a calculated move, a quiet attempt to unsettle her without raising alarm. Lara kept her expression neutral, carefully measuring her responses. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of noticing her discomfort, so she nodded politely, gave minimal replies, and kept her voice calm. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. She catalogued every jab, every carefully placed word, silently vowing that she would find a way to turn this night around on her own terms. The tension at the table grew almost imperceptibly. Jace's words were like gentle taps on a wound that hadn't fully healed, each one pulling at a thread of old pain. Lara, however, refused to let him see her unravel. She could feel the power in simply enduring it, in keeping her composure as he tried to play the room. By the time dessert was mentioned, Lara had already made a quiet decision. She would not allow his subtle games to dominate the night. Every clever remark he made only reinforced her determination. She would stay calm, keep her dignity intact, and wait for the moment when she could reclaim control. Not with anger, but with quiet, unshakable strength. Lara pushed her plate slightly aside and let her eyes wander across the table, watching Jace carefully. On the surface, he appeared effortless, chatting easily, laughing at his own jokes, leaning back as if he owned the room. But Lara noticed the little things, how he smirked when he caught her glance, the confident tilt of his chin, the way his fingers drummed lightly on the table, as if counting his small victory. Every gesture was familiar, every movement a reminder that he still believed he could control the atmosphere, just as he once had controlled her. She studied the way he interacted with her parents. His charm was precise, measured, almost rehearsed. He complimented their home, their cooking, even the way they had raised her. Each remark carefully crafted to earn approval, while keeping her subtly uncomfortable. Lara could feel the layers of arrogance underneath, the sense that he thought he was untouchable, that no one could see the manipulations behind the words. Her own calm exterior was deliberate. She let him speak, nodded at appropriate times, smiled lightly when necessary, all while cataloging every action and every tone of voice. She realized that reacting too quickly or showing irritation would only fuel him, so she maintained quiet composure, her mind working in the background. As she observed, Lara's thoughts began to shift toward strategy. She didn't want confrontation or drama, not tonight. Instead, she planned a measured response, something that would put her back in control without overtly challenging him. She thought about subtle ways to redirect attention, to highlight her own accomplishments and independence, letting her parents see her strength without him realizing he had lost his grip on the room. Her gaze lingered on the slight twitch at the corner of his smile, the flicker in his eyes when he thought she wasn't noticing. That small arrogance, once infuriating, now fueled her determination. She could play along, let him believe he was charming, while quietly setting the stage for her own quiet victory. Lara considered small gestures she could use, a story here, a mention of a recent success there, that would shift the tone without seeming intentional. She imagined the moment when the power in the room would subtly tilt in her favor, when he would start to sense that the control he thought he had was slipping. The idea gave her a calm satisfaction, a sense of quiet anticipation that steadied her nerve. By the time the main course was being cleared, Lara felt a growing confidence. She wasn't just enduring the evening, she was analyzing, understanding, and preparing. She realized that her composure itself was a kind of quiet strength, and her plan of subtle retaliation would remind everyone, including Jace, that she was not someone to be undermined. With each glance, each careful observation, Lara built her own quiet power. She knew that the night wasn't over, but she also knew she was ready. She would leave the dinner unshaken, and in her own time, she would turn every slight and every smug glance into proof that she was stronger than he ever imagined. Lara excused herself and walked toward the kitchen, hoping to stretch her legs and clear her mind. The soft clatter of utensils and quiet hum of the refrigerator provided a brief respite from the tension at the table. As she reached for a plate of dessert, she overheard a fragment of conversation from her parents' side of the room that made her pause. It wasn't obvious at first, just a mention of a phone call earlier that day, the kind of casual remark meant to seem innocent. But her mind snapped to attention as she pieced it together. Jace had spoken to her parents before the dinner, painting himself as the accomplished, thoughtful man he wanted them to see. He had carefully framed Lara as unreasonable, difficult, and maybe even ungrateful, turning her parents into unwitting allies in his subtle campaign. The realization hit Lara with a sharp pang. She had been fighting him at the table without knowing that he had already prepared the ground, manipulating perceptions even before she arrived. Her chest tightened, a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief flooding her at once. How could they not have seen through it? How could someone she once loved twist the story so effortlessly, using the people she trusted most as tools in his game? She leaned against the counter for a moment, taking deep, controlled breaths to keep herself steady. The betrayal wasn't only from him. Her family, despite their good intentions, had been unknowingly drawn into his scheme. It was a cruel combination, a secret that made the evening feel heavier, more suffocating. Every polite smile, every casual comment at the table suddenly carried a different weight. Lara's mind raced as she processed the hidden truth. She imagined the phone conversation, his practiced tone, the selective truths, the way he had manipulated them without their suspicion. The ease with which he twisted reality frustrated her, but it also sharpened her focus. This revelation didn't have to destroy her night. It could fuel the careful, quiet strategy she had already begun to form. She straightened, wiping her hands on a napkin, and returned to the table with her head held high. The secret she had uncovered was dangerous, but it also gave her clarity. Now she knew that everything he said and did tonight had a deeper purpose, and that knowledge became her advantage. She could respond deliberately, highlight her own achievements, and reveal the cracks in his carefully constructed image without making it seem intentional. Sitting back down, Lara forced a calm smile, letting the warmth of her parents' oblivious chatter wash over her, while she quietly plotted the subtle ways she would reclaim the room. She understood that the betrayal, though painful, had given her insight. An insight, she realized, could be far more powerful than anger. The dessert would be served soon, but Lara already knew. This night, with its hidden truths and quiet manipulations, would end very differently than Jace had hoped. Lara took a slow breath and decided it was time to shift the energy in the room. She didn't raise her voice or confront him. Instead, she let the conversation flow naturally until she found the opening she had been waiting for. She began recounting small stories from the past few months. How she had taken a solo weekend trip to the mountains, navigated challenges she never thought she could, and even tried her hand at painting, something she had always wanted to do, but had put off. Her parents listened intently, their smiles genuine as they saw a side of her that had grown stronger, more confident. Lara spoke casually about the promotion she had earned at work, how the project she had led had succeeded against all odds. She told them about the friends she had met, the new experiences she had embraced, and the independence she had carved out for herself. Each story was simple, unassuming, yet it painted a picture of someone thriving without the presence of the man sitting across from her. Jace's expression subtly changed as he realized the attention was no longer on. He shifted in his chair, a slight tension creeping into his posture. Lara noticed the flicker of unease in his eyes as her parents nodded approvingly at her stories, their pride evident. She kept her tone light, warm, and confident, never hinting at any bitterness or anger. But the contrast between her growth and his carefully crafted image was impossible to miss. The room began to feel different. Her parents leaned in, asking questions about her experiences, completely captivated by her tales of independence and accomplishment. Each question gave Lara another opportunity to demonstrate how much she had evolved, how resilient she had become, and how she no longer relied on anyone else to validate her. Jace tried to interject a few times, but the moment had passed. Lara politely acknowledged him with a nod, but continued to engage her parents, letting the glow of her stories take center stage. She noticed the way he clenched his hands briefly under the table, how a slight furrow appeared on his brow. The charm he once wielded so effortlessly was faltering in the face of her calm confidence. By the time she finished describing her latest adventure, the energy in the room had fully shifted. Lara's parents were genuinely impressed, asking for details, smiling proudly, and completely immersed in her journey. Jace sat quietly, trying to maintain composure, but his discomfort was palpable. Lara leaned back slightly, a subtle smile on her lips, feeling the satisfaction of reclaiming the room without a single direct confrontation. She realized that by simply being herself and sharing her progress, she had taken control of the evening. The tables had turned, and for the first time since arriving, Lara felt a quiet triumph settling in her chest. She knew that this was only the beginning of reclaiming her dignity, but the shift was undeniable. Tonight, she had shown, without argument or accusation, that she was no longer defined by the past, and the impact of her growth would not be easy for Jace to ignore. Lara picked up her fork and cut a small piece of dessert, letting her gaze drift casually toward Jace. She spoke lightly, almost offhandedly, about a few funny little misunderstandings from the past, moments when she had been confused by certain stories he told, or when plans hadn't gone as expected. She framed it as if she were chuckling at the irony, not accusing anyone. Her parents listened closely, intrigued by the way she recounted the details. Each anecdote was subtle, careful, a gentle unraveling of the image Jace had tried to maintain. She mentioned times when he had boasted about achievements that, in reality, hadn't happened, and the small contradictions she had noticed along the way. Lara spoke in a calm, almost amused tone, as if it were all trivial, but the effect was anything but trivial. Jace's smile faltered slightly. He tried to interject, to explain, but Lara's casual demeanor left him uncertain. The more she spoke, the more her parents began connecting the dots. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to dawning realization, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. The pride they had shown earlier for him now wavered, replaced by subtle doubt. Lara kept her tone light, peppering in small details about plans that hadn't worked out or promises that had fallen through, emphasizing the humor of it all rather than the hurt. Her words highlighted his misrepresentations, but she never raised her voice or made a direct accusation. The subtlety made the message sting harder. It left Jace exposed without Lara appearing confrontational. She noticed the change immediately. The confident ease he had carried all evening was slipping. His posture stiffened, his words became measured, and the easy charm he relied on so heavily now seemed forced. Every glance he shot Lara was layered with tension, an unspoken acknowledgement that the evening was no longer under his control. Holly and Dean's expressions were shifting as well. They exchanged quiet looks, realization dawning in their eyes. The polite smiles faded, replaced by a mix of surprise and disappointment. The more Lara spoke, the clearer it became that Jace had misrepresented himself, and that he had tried to manipulate their perception. By the time the dessert plates were nearly empty, the room's energy had transformed. Lara remained calm, sipping her drink and smiling gently, while Jace's earlier confidence seemed to dissolve completely. The subtlety of her approach left him powerless, unable to defend himself without drawing more attention to the discrepancies she had highlighted. Lara felt a quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. Without shouting, confronting, or embarrassing him directly, she had shifted the balance. The charm he had relied on to win approval and control the atmosphere had crumbled, and her parents were beginning to see him for who he really was. She leaned back in her chair, allowing the moment to sink in, knowing that the gentle exposure of his past lies had delivered a quiet, calculated form of revenge. Tonight, she had reclaimed her space, her dignity, and her voice, all without raising it once. By the time the last bites of dessert were gone, the atmosphere around the table had changed completely. Lara sat with a calm, measured presence, her posture relaxed, her expression serene. The ease and confidence she carried contrasted sharply with Jace's faltering composure. He tried to interject a story, a joke, or a compliment, but each attempt seemed to stumble, as if the words were caught somewhere between his mouth and reality. Her parents' faces were a mixture of realization and remorse. Holly reached for Lara's hand across the table, her eyes soft, and quietly apologized for not understanding how much he had manipulated her. Dean cleared his throat, adding his own acknowledgement that they hadn't fully grasped the situation. The weight of oversight hung in the room, but it was tempered by the pride they now showed for Lara's poise and resilience. Jace's confident smile wavered. He shifted in his seat, glanced nervously at Lara, and then tried to steer the conversation back to himself, but it was too late. The room no longer offered him the audience he had expected. The energy had shifted irrevocably. Every glance he threw her way carried the subtle admission that he was no longer in control. Lara's quiet strength had created a space where her truth could stand without argument. She hadn't needed to raise her voice, accuse him, or humiliate him. The evidence of his past misrepresentations had spoken for itself, layered carefully into her stories, her observations, and her casual revelations. The balance of power at the table had been re-established, and she held it effortlessly. Her parents now focused on her entirely, asking questions about her recent achievements and experiences. Lara answered with grace, letting them see the full scope of her independence, intelligence, and composure. Each response subtly reinforced the message that she had moved forward, grown stronger, and reclaimed the dignity that he had once undermined. Jace's attempts to regain footing grew increasingly obvious. He fumbled over words, repeated points, and offered forced laughter that failed to land. The charm he had relied on so heavily now felt hollow, leaving him exposed in front of the people who mattered most. Lara observed silently, her calm face betraying none of the satisfaction she felt inside. When the final cup of coffee was served, Lara rose from the table gracefully. She offered polite farewells, her voice steady and warm, her composure impeccable. Jace mumbled a half-hearted goodbye, and her parents exchanged another look with her, one of support and newfound understanding. Walking out of the house, Lara felt a sense of completion she hadn't felt in months. She had endured the evening, exposed deception without confrontation, and quietly claimed her narrative. For the first time in a long while, she felt in full control, not only of the room, but of her own story. The night had ended with clarity, dignity, and the undeniable knowledge that she had emerged stronger, unshaken, and vindicated. Later that night, Lara sat alone in her bedroom, the quiet hum of the house around her. The events of dinner replayed in her mind like a movie she had directed herself, each moment clear and vivid. She thought about Jace, his subtle manipulations, the way he had tried to assert control, and how effortlessly she had turned the evening around without raising her voice. The anger that had built inside her over the months had shifted into something steadier, a deep sense of clarity and strength. Her thoughts then turned to her parents. They hadn't meant to hurt her, yet their ignorance had allowed Jace to gain the upper hand at first. Understanding that they were human, that mistakes didn't always come from malice, helped her release a portion of the frustration that had gnawed at her. The mix of disappointment and love she felt toward them was complicated, but it also reminded her how much she valued her own judgment and independence. Lara reflected on her own choices that night, how she had navigated the tension with calm and awareness, how she had spoken of her experiences and growth without seeking to shame or humiliate anyone. She realized that true power didn't come from proving someone wrong or hurting them in return. It came from standing firm, being authentic, and letting the truth speak for itself. She had done exactly that, and in the process, she had reclaimed a sense of control that she hadn't felt in years. Her mind wandered through the months since the breakup, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, the doubt that had once weighed her down. Each memory now seemed smaller, less intimidating, because she had faced another challenge and emerged not only intact but stronger. She understood that resilience wasn't built by avoiding pain, but by confronting it, learning from it, and choosing to rise above it. A small smile tugged at her lips as she realized how far she had come. The echoes of past shadows no longer dictated her feelings or decisions. For the first time in a long while, she felt a lightness, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. She had faced someone who had once held sway over her emotions and emerged with dignity, proving to herself that her worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's perception. Lara leaned back against her pillows, the calm of the evening wrapping around her like a soft blanket. She felt empowered, renewed, and free in a way that went beyond any external validation. This wasn't about revenge. It was about self-respect, growth, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had honored herself. As sleep began to tug at her eyelids, Lara allowed herself to imagine a future unburdened by old wounds, a life full of genuine happiness, confidence, and strength. The night had given her closure, not through confrontation or drama, but through the quiet assertion of her own power. Finally, she felt ready to embrace the life she deserved, unshaken by the past and fully in command of her own story. Hey besties, thanks for sticking with me through this emotional journey. Lara faced betrayal from someone she once trusted, and even from those she loved, yet she stood her ground with grace and strength. By the end, she reclaimed her story, proving her worth and resilience. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. See you next one. Bye.